Hello and welcome to the 15th episode of You and I for the Kenai. This is Eric, Aaron, and Cobran, and today we have another special guest with us today to hear her recovery story. Jodi, how are you today?
I'm great, thank you.
Nice. So let's, we've been talking about, as I'm starting to ramble, we've been talking about kind of making these shorter because we've been back at Serenity House today, and we've made one today, but it's 2.5 hours long, so we're going to cut that down. So let's quickly touch on your background. Where are you from?
I was born in Soldotna, Alaska, and raised here. I moved away for a couple of years, and I ended up coming right back home.
Yeah, you're a lifer, huh?
Yeah.
Nice. So yeah, let's jump right to it. When was your first experiences with substance?
Oh, when I was really young, my dad actually grew weed, and my grandpa and all my family, it was like the song, the good old family tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just a crazy family, and I grew up with everyone drinking every day and smoking weed. I think I clipped my dad's plants in like 4th grade and started drinking like in junior high.
So that was all pretty normal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's what you knew.
Right.
So was there a point where you started to get into more and more substance use and you thought, maybe this isn't normal, or maybe this level of use isn't normal? I mean, how does one go about realizing, like, maybe this is all that I know isn't, like, the best option for my life or something, Do you get what I'm asking?
Yes. So I thought I was like a good kid, and that was just normal high school behaviors, and I was actually on the swing choir team and the cheerleading squad, and I was, one of those good girls, and it wasn't until after I graduated and moved away and then came back is when I started getting into heavier drugs, which I knew weren't okay, but I still did it.
What kind of started that? Was it like your friend group when you came back, or what kind of contributed to the change, I guess, from leaving and coming back?
Oh, I was in a relationship, and I ended up cutting off that relationship and moving back home.
So did they kind of introduce you into that sort of world, or?
Oh, no, my sister did, actually. I probably did a lot of drugs with my sister when I was younger, and she was younger than me, so it's kind of crazy.
Or what age do you think you were around that time?
Well, I think in high school I did like Oxycontin and stuff, but I still don't even consider that really bad, which it was. It was very bad, and I was smoking it and getting sick. But it was all the high schoolers and everybody around there did that, and then I moved away and I got away from all that, and that was fine. And when I came back, my sister had introduced me. I actually had caught her in the car. It was on a ride back from Anchorage, and she was smoking meth, and then I was like, hey, what's that? I want to try some. And it was all downhill from there.
Sure. How old were you then?
I was 19.
And is this like kind of a point where you're thinking maybe how I drink or use drugs isn't how other people do, or isn't quite normal? Like, is there something in your mind that's saying, oh, I might be addicted, or I might have like an addiction?
No, I had no awareness of addiction, and I had no idea, and that didn't even cross my mind for years of substance use.
Getting into the substance use was more of just a curiosity thing?
Yeah.
Yeah? You just didn't...
Yeah, boredom, curiosity, which is really sad.
No, it's interesting because all the other recovery stories we've heard this thing called, no, that's not where I was going, but everyone else a lot of these people we've talked to, but you and one other person are the only ones that have had just like a fairly normal entrance to it without having to have gone through something.
I don't think so. I mean, she was trimming buds at 4th grade. I don't think that's a normal entrance into this.
Well, not into that, but like into the heavier drugs, it's always like I felt this way. I felt like not okay with myself, or like there was some emotion tied into trying these drugs. It wasn't just a curiosity thing. A lot of the time, there was they were masking something, or
I probably have a lot of emotion there too.
Yeah.
Like, my mother was paralyzed when I was 5 years old, so I had to grow up very quickly, and I had to be the responsible kid, you know, and I always put on this act like everything was okay, and so when I used substances, it helped me escape from that and accomplish everything for a while.
Yeah, see, that's more what I was talking about.
Okay.
That's been super common. That's something we've heard a lot, rather than just, you know, common curiosity. That was kind of the difference I was making. Now it makes a lot more sense now, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking there was something there, but we just hadn't quite. So you started using, and it kind of allowed a good escape. It allowed that ability to be strong, and it made it a little bit manageable.
Yeah, I kept my looking good.
Yeah.
So was it more like kind of a tool? You knew that you had these responsibilities that you really valued, and you kind of felt like maybe you weren't capable of handling that and, you know, growing up at the same time. And so was that kind of an area where you look for help in managing life? Or was it more of like, this is really painful and I want to get away?
It was probably more pain-driven, but I didn't let anybody know that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was kind of, seemed a little mixture of both, yeah. A little bit of a tool to do the things you needed to do, as well as
for a long time, it did help me to like accomplish a lot, and until
it didn't.
Yeah.
And when you started to get to the point to where it didn't, where it was holding you back or destroying some things that you valued, I imagine it had to have destroyed some kind of work or some kind of relationships or some kind of like self-esteem, you know, whatever those may be. Then are you reaching a point where you're like, maybe this is a problem? What's that progression like from, I'm doing this to kind of numb, to where it's like, oh man, like this might need to stop? Like, when does that happen?
Honestly, I don't know.
Sure.
When I was in the liquor industry since I was 18. You could serve alcohol in the States. So before I even moved back home and started using methamphetamines was my drug of choice, then I was already in the liquor industry. So when I came here, I continued on, serving and eventually bartending, eventually Miller Girl, doing modeling for car shows. But I was a pretty well-known bartender and ran a bar. And in order for me to keep drinking, I would get high so that I could still function somewhat. But I didn't think I lost a lot of jobs. I lost a lot of relationships. But I don't think I ever was like, hey, it's probably the drugs.
Or me. Yeah, it's somebody else's fault. Is that kind of where you were going?
Yes, it was always something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounded kind of similar to something what Brett said a little bit. It sounded like if these people weren't like enabling the life or that he wanted or that he thought he needed, it was like, well, screw you. Like, you guys are the problem. You guys are, what's holding everything back. Like, moving on. And so it sounds like you were probably kind of like, well, okay, like, I guess, like, I don't know what your problem is, but moving on.
Yeah.
And you were transitioning very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
When does it become maybe a you thing? When does it become how did you get into any form of recovery?
Well, I had gotten, I'm not even sure what year it was. I got my first set of drug charges, which was just weed. It was only weed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it was on federal property, and I didn't realize that. I was at an airport.
Oh, dang.
And,
they don't like you.
Yeah, that's really bad,
Yeah.
apparently. And I was just trying to help a friend out, and I was naive enough to not know what I was getting into. So I was transporting 1 pound and 1 ounce of weed, which is a lot, and very not good. So I ended up going to jail for a minute, not very long, and then getting out and then getting on probation. But I complied and I completed with all my probation while using. And so I didn't learn anything. I got away with it.
Yeah.
Right.
And were you taking UAs and stuff at this
Yeah.
point too? But
Yes.
we've heard, and you said methamphetamine is your drug of choice at this point, so it's probably pretty easy to
I just
kind of dodge around it.
just took days to get out of
Yeah.
your system, and my system anyways. I didn't have a lot of meat on me. And so it wasn't until after I got my second set of drug charges that I actually, I was going to beat the court, right? Because they were going to tell me to go to treatment. So I was just going to be one step ahead of them and do what they were going to tell me to do.
So you entered treatment on your own?
But only because I knew that.
Right. I mean, right.
But yes.
You're
yeah.
like, okay, this is what they'd like to see. Got
Yes,
you.
but
Okay.
actually, I
worked.
did have self-help books. I did have self-help books from years ago that I actually had started and thought about and tried because I knew that I was living a life that I wasn't meant to live. I mean, I knew that it wasn't okay when it just became more and more and more. Like I would drink every day. I would do different opiate pills every day, and then I ended up doing heroin too, and benzos and THC and meth, all of it combined every single day. I mean, that's even a miracle to be alive.
Yeah.
So what was there really like an eye-opening experience where you're like, whoa, this is not going to work out? Was that, being, I guess, arrested at the airport where you started kind of thinking about it, or was there like a really big experience where you're like, this isn't who I want to be?
I probably had those thoughts off and on throughout the years, but it was just so short and such a little glimpse of it that I would just continue to use and to numb out and just kept doing what I knew. And it wasn't until I was in treatment when I actually had this breakthrough that was like, wow,
Well, you probably needed that treatment to kind of know that there was something else, right? It sounds like you're kind of just doing what is super familiar.
I had no idea that there was like a treatment center that you could go to talk about your problems where they wouldn't judge you and you could be honest with them and tell them about your experiences and things you'd been through. I had no idea. Like nobody came knocking on my bathroom door to tell me, hey, there's another way to live.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so it was that kind of that second drug charge that got you into treatment that kind of brought you a new perspective.
Yes, it was a complete blessing in disguise.
And that's hard, I mean, on the one hand, it's like, okay, great, you were able to, get this new perspective. But then if you look at it from another perspective, it's kind of like you actually had to catch legal trouble to see that, like, abusing cocktails of drugs and hard drugs wasn't completely normal,
Yeah.
And I imagine that you are not the only one. I imagine there are tons and tons of groups of people out there who don't really know any different. Yeah,
it was super scary because, I have that black mark on my record. I am a 2-time drug felon. I mean, if you'd look at me and I tell you I'm a cold, hard criminal, you'd probably laugh.
Yeah,
but,
okay.
I mean...
So am I.
It's been a real obstacle it has to overcome and work through. I didn't think I'd be able to get a good job. I didn't know what the future would hold for me because of the barriers.
So what kind of gave you hope during that time?
Was your inpatient treatment at Serenity?
Yes.
Okay. And then back to what Coburn said.
My son, I had a little boy. He was 18 months old when I went to jail on my second set of drug charges. And I actually went into treatment and stuff for him. because of the law and because of my son. It wasn't because of me, and I didn't learn that until later, that I needed to be there for me in order to be there for anybody else. Mm-hmm. But he was my driving factor. I wasn't going to let my story end like that.
So did you kind of have this, I'm not sure if it's like apathy, but it doesn't sound like you really put yourself at a high value.
No.
Was there a reason for that, or, I mean, if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine.
No, it's fine. It's just everyone that I loved and that was closest to me hurt me the worst. Mm-hmm. So I just put up these walls and put on these masks, and then I didn't want to let people in.
And it seems like as a young child or as an adolescent or as a young adult, you have no reason but when that happens to think like the people who claim to value me the most or who I would believe would value me the most have in actual actions shown me little to no value.
Right.
You know?
I mean, I still struggle with this.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, you were forced to grow up so fast. You know what I mean? When you're the one at such a young age with all that responsibility, you're the one supposed to be taking care of people, and it's one of those things where eventually you come to a point where, like, well, who's taking care of me? Mm-hmm. And if you never get that, and if you never see that, how are you to trust anybody anyway? You've never had anybody to trust. You don't even know what that looks like at this point.
And so you would learn to trust drugs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know it seems like
consistent.
Maybe a little bit cliche, but isn't a pretty popular thing in like rehabilitation programs that you like write a goodbye letter to your drug. Mm-hmm. And I read one the other day on Facebook. A woman had basically, she wasn't in treatment, but she had written her own, basically saying, like, you were my best friend, you were always there for me, you always made me feel better. And I've been listening to what you're saying is like, if you look at that from one perspective, it's kind of like, you treated me pretty well until you didn't. And that's kind of what she said. It's kind of like, you valued me, you treated me well until you didn't any longer. I didn't know how much it was going to cost, and I didn't know that you would really actually end up letting me down so much. However, like, it seems like you weren't finding value, you weren't being valued or treated with love and respect from a lot of people, but you knew that, like, there was something you could turn to. Drugs and alcohol. Mm-hmm. And then you kind of had to learn. It seems like maybe in treatment, maybe you learned, like, maybe less that, like, doing drugs, maybe, because I was thinking, like, oh, you learned that maybe doing drugs all the time wasn't normal. But now that I'm listening, I think maybe you were, like, it was much less anything to do with drugs and much more, like, there are people who will value me for me. That sounds like the bigger thing that you learned.
Yes, and I have been able to completely change the cycle from the way that I was raised to the way that I'm able to raise my children.
That's
and
huge.
It's huge because I didn't know. I had no idea what else was out there or was available or what a healthy family looked like. I had no clue. And I get to provide that, for myself and for my family today. It's amazing.
How long have you been clean today?
Today? Well, my clean date is 11/28/2011.
Oh, wow.
So in November I'll have 7 years. My
Wow.
lucky number.
Wow. Awesome.
That's exciting.
It is
really
crazy.
awesome.
So I'm like telling my sponsor, right? Like, I just don't understand. I don't understand how these people, I'm just struggling with watching them and, seeing their situations. And she says, I go, it's so weird. Isn't it just so weird? How come they can't get it? And she's like, Jodi, how many people do you know that don't have relapse as a part of their story? And I'm like sitting there silent. Like, she goes, you're the weird one.
Yeah. So you went to treatment and got clean and never relapsed?
Correct.
Wow. That's impressive. That's
that's fairly uncommon.
Yeah,
too.
that does, as far as what we've heard and everything, and some of what we've read as well, is like, you are the weird one. You
I know,
are the
it brings
outlier.
like tears to my eyes, though. I've been shown so much mercy and grace, and I don't understand why me.
Yeah.
But I've worked very hard. You know, the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah.
I have the actions that go behind it. I mean, it didn't happen itself.
Yeah.
What do you think the difference is between your approach and other people's, or do you think it was just a completely personal thing? Like, what do you think it was that kept you, for lack of a better term, on the straight and narrow, and just never look back?
Honestly, as a little girl, I did go to church with other friends, and I did have this connection and this longing, and I built that when I was little, and I let it go. You know, I put my God under the curtain and pushed it away because I was doing bad things, and I didn't incorporate that in my life very much. I did some point. I actually did go to church high and probably used drugs in the bathroom there, but I was able to have a newfound faith in my higher power when I got clean, and I totally solely relied on Him. And I'm really enmeshed with my church, and I sing on the praise and worship team, and I don't think I could be where I am today without having that support.
So did they know where you'd come from, and did they offer like kind of a non-judgmental support and just really accepted you, or how did that influence you? Was it the people, or was it just coming back to your faith and realizing that this was kind of the person you wanted to be?
Both.
Both?
Oh.
Okay. Wow.
Is an acknowledgement of a higher power, what step is that? Is that the first one?
Second.
Because I thought the first one was that your life had become unmanageable.
Yeah.
And then, but there is
and
an acknowledgement of a higher
power. Come to believe that a power greater than yourself could restore your sanity.
So it sounded like you, with your drug charges and looking at your child, were pretty quickly in touch with step one. And then step two, you already had some really deep roots planted that you just kind of had to tap back into.
Right.
So it sounds like those first two steps, you were like fully blooming within just, 30, 60, 90 days.
It was pretty funny because when I was in jail, I had the NA book, and I sat there with some other girls, and we like read it, and I'm like, "Yep, got that. Oh, step one. Yep, got that. Step one." And they're like, "That's not how you work the steps."
Sure.
Oh.
Yeah.
You're like, what? You don't just have like a multiple choice test I can take real fast?
Check.
Yeah. Check this box. Get out of here.
So when you encountered, I'm sure you still encountered temptation. How did you deal with that?
Yeah. What was that like?
I actually did the other day.
Yeah, that's something about how do you deal with that? Like,
Yeah.
not even did you deal with that? How do you deal with that?
Yeah,
it never
somebody
goes away,
that's
does
had coming up on 7 years, no relapses, still, obviously you were and continue to run into these temptations. What are some of the things that you have done and continue to do?
There's been all different kinds of situations, but recently I was a part of a wedding, which is very amazing people in my life that I love that are normies. That's what we call them.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of alcohol there. And, there's this part of me that's like, man, I wish I could drink. Like, I wouldn't mind a drink right now. And the thought that kept running through my mind was, well, you'd have to quit your job and move. Because I am employed with the Serenity House. I work for the hospital, and I have been working here for 2 years, and I never thought I would have a professional job or a career to work towards, and I am working towards my chemical dependency counselor 1 right now.
Right.
I am a certified technician.
Congrats. Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's still tempting. Like, it's still there. It's still hard. But I have this weird thing. Because being a part of the NA program and working, multiple sets of steps, I have this weirdness about me that I know those nightmares that you have, I guess, about relapsing and having to admit it and talk to people. I'm just like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, that's kind of like what Zach said. Like, I think for him, if I remember correctly, he said one of the hardest things about, one of the biggest deterrents about relapsing was that he'd have to quit again. Was that him? He's like, we were already done. We're just going to stay done because getting done again would be a lot more difficult.
Yeah,
Is that
and
something you think about?
I think about, if I could probably drink, but I've been around for a minute, right? So I hear these stories. I'm trying to soak up as much as I can from other people and learn from their experiences.
Right.
That's why I have a sponsor. That's why I have mentors in my life. That's why I continue to learn and grow, is because I see what didn't work. Okay, well, that didn't work. Or I see how somebody's life is. I'm like, hey, well, I don't want that, So by other people's experiences where they could drink a little bit for a while, maybe it'd last for a year.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what Brett had said too. He said when he had thought about maybe he could drink, or that other people come to him and say oh, I can drink. He goes, oh, I think it was Brett who said this. He goes, oh, you can. You can you can drink and you'll probably be fine.
Right,
for a week,
while.
for 2 weeks, for a month, but probably not for very long. You can for a while. I think that's kind of how he phrased it.
And I think alcohol is the hardest thing, because I was a complete alcoholic and raised my my family that drinking all day every day was normal. It was okay. So as far as the other drugs, I don't get to be around them very much. I get to see people who are under the influence, and it's not very attractive.
Sure.
But as far as actually I've had the opportunity to clean out people's belongings and stuff like that, which is scary, but it's not a temptation.
Right. Yeah. So one of the things that we've heard before in Cherie's story, and then in some other stories, is this idea of playing that tape forward. So people have relapsed several times, and they say, I think about maybe just one drink, maybe just one bump, whatever. But then they say, but at this point, I can really play that tape forward. I can see that is only going to lead to a lot of pain, a lot of destruction. However, you only can play that. You're saying that you have soaked up these stories, and so you can kind of play that tape forward, but it's a second hand. It's second hand playing that tape forward. So other people are I've done these things before, and this is what's happened. So you go and you're press play. I can see what's going to happen. No thanks. If I was to relapse, you don't get to play your own tape forward
because I don't know.
No, you don't know. You got to borrow everybody else's tape, and
but
that sounds like what
worth,
you're doing. You're
it's
borrowing.
Not worth trying at this point in my life. I have come I've come in so far to just be is it even worth it?
I mean, especially coming from your background where alcoholism is so prominent and drinking being so socially acceptable, I imagine that would be the hardest temptation. You know what I mean? Because you're not necessarily around, harder drugs every day. You're not. You can go to places. You can go to a lot more places where you're out of the way of even pot or harder drugs than you can in alcohol. You know what I mean? You go out to dinner, they have a beer menu. And that seems hard.
And there's I think about my kids, right? And I never want them to see me like that. I don't think my son would, remember when he was a year and a half old.
So only your 18-month-old son ever saw anything.
He's not going to remember anything. So I remember growing up with my mom being an alcoholic, and, my dad was called No-Show Joe, and how unsafe it very, very much was. So unpredictable and unsafe, and I just don't want my kids to see me like that.
And it sounds like another thing you said, if I was to drink, you not only have all these other tapes of other people's that you can play forward when they did this is what happened, but you can also, it sounds like you have a massive amount of immediate accountability.
Right.
Or immediate consequences. So it's not I could drink and I'll probably be hungover, have to call into work, or I'll probably call into work tomorrow or something. Some kind of I'm not going to try to make it up, but some small consequence. Yours is I can drink, but then I'm going to have to quit my job and I'm going to have to move.
Yeah.
Those are two major things, man. It's Nah, miss me.
Yeah.
Super accountability.
Swerve.
If
Yeah,
I ever
super
just
accountability.
jump up and decide I'm going to move, there's probably some red
Yeah.
flags unless I have some huge supports in place.
Sure.
So did you surround yourself with people who would really keep you accountable? Was that kind of your idea? You're like, wait, I need to really separate from this, and I need to start getting involved with people who are going to care, and they're going to know, and there's going to be consequences.
Yes, I think it's one of the hardest things for people is because they don't want to let go of other.
yeah.
They don't want to let go
Absolutely.
of friends, so-called
Absolutely.
friends and family, and I just had to cut people out. I created anew,
Wow.
which is hard and uncomfortable and
Oh,
awkward.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's rare.
Especially
Pretty
when a lot of them are
rare.
your family.
Yeah, and I have my church family now. And honestly, I have a family here at work. Like, I have the best people that I work with that build me up and are compassionate about my life. And I have some amazing mentors here.
And as you are continuing, coming up on like your 7th year, maybe you can, not necessarily super detailed or anything, no daunting task, but can you just kind of walk through, like, for other people who are maybe new to recovery as well as people who have been in it for a while, like, what were kind of those first few years like compared to these last few years? Is there a difference? Like, how did your recovery kind of evolve? As far as I'm aware, and this could be like me just not being super in touch with some of the people we've talked to, and for any listeners out there, if I'm wrong here, I'm sorry, but I think 7 years is probably our longest recovery time that we've
It's the longest
had.
we've
So
interviewed.
that we have. I think you have the close to the longest or the longest recovery time.
Until you do my sponsor.
So what was how has, because we see like some people, this is all to say, some people are like, when I started, it was 90 meetings, 90 days, or like 100 meetings in like 30 days, it sounds like, meeting, plugging in, group. And then they're like, now, like I'm a year, I go to a meeting once a week, but I also have these jobs and I have these other things that are going on. It's kind of evolving. How has your recovery kind of evolved? And on another note, it sounds like with your work and with your job that you're always kind of plugged into a recovery mindset. So maybe you're kind of a little bit different than some of the people we've talked to. I know some people work similar positions, I know. But how has it evolved in some way over the last, it's coming up on 7 years?
Well, in the beginning, I had some legal help. I was actually court ordered to not have a cell phone because I was a drug dealer. And
I didn't even know they could court
I know.
order that.
I didn't know that either. But
No phone.
Yeah, they took that away.
Yeah, wow.
If we see you at the Walmart getting that prepaid card,
Yeah.
you are going right back.
Wow.
And
No
then
burners.
I actually went through my personal care provider, and I set up. I didn't have to. I set up UAs 3 times a week for
Just to hold yourself
accountability,
accountable.
and they would call my aunt because I looked up to her, and she helped me. She was the one that helped me take me in right before I went to treatment. And so I did UAs 3 times a week, and then I went to treatment, and then I ended up, I had to be on ankle monitor too for 5 months. So I have this little boy. I'm on ankle monitor. I got to stay with a friend, and I would walk because you can't drive a vehicle on ankle monitor. I had to walk or ride a bike or push a stroller to treatment or get a ride to meetings. And I was able to finish my ankle monitor out, and then I moved into the first Serenity House transitional living home. I was the pilot project for the first female to live into their transitional living home. And
Oh, wow.
that's evolved so much since then. It's amazing. But I did go to a lot of meetings. I did get a sponsor. I did go to all of my groups. It actually continued on with treatment and with therapy for 4 years. I didn't just do the 1 year and then be done. I continued on and was able to work on all this root stuff. Like, I'm sorry, but I puked everything out there, and I was just going to deal with it all and be done with it. I wasn't going to keep this over here and hide this over here because we weren't going to talk about that. Like, I honestly believe that's what has kept me clean, is because I don't have anything hidden. I don't have any secrets. I was able to process and continually, because stuff still comes up, process these situations and move on.
Yeah, I forget exactly who said it. Was it Zach or was it Danielle? They said, one of the things you'll read, maybe I think in the big book, but don't exactly quote me on this, but they said something like, it says that one of the only reasons you will fail this program is if you have an inability to be honest.
I think that was either Danielle or Cassandra.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly.
Yeah, one of them said that, like, if you have an inability to be honest, you will not make it in this program. And it sounds like whether it would be difficult, I imagine it was, you took that on and you were just, like, putting it out there, honest, open, transparent in some of these ways where it mattered.
Yeah, I actually see a lot of people in a lot of situations where I personally think that they don't deal with all their stuff, and it keeps them
chained, enslaved.
Yes.
Before we wrap up here, one last thing I wanted to touch on before we wrap up here is, because we talk about going to meetings, and doing these things. We keep saying these things, going to meetings and other things. The therapy part of it with the counselor, the therapeutic part where you're really sitting down and not necessarily working on recovery issues like directly involved with substance abuse, but those childhood things or just those root problems that kind of sparked the emotion that, that kind of got the whole ball rolling. You said you continued that for 4 years. Do you still continue now, like in a counseling session or in a therapeutic environment of any sort?
No, I attend a lot of trainings. I continue to feed myself because I love to learn. I like to learn and grow. So if I don't want to come to that point where I'm stagnant or I think I've made it, or I'm very teachable, and I'm thankful for that. I love that I get to continue to learn with my employment, and I do trainings at church in that setting too. And I don't go to as many meetings as I wish that I did, but it's a season, I think, in my life. There was a time where I held an area level position for 2 years and did public relations with NA, and that was an awesome experience. And then I was a secretary for the area for 2 years. And at this time now, I actually hold a position at the jail where I approve people to go volunteer in there, and I go in there and volunteer and bring meetings in there as well. So it just depends on where I can serve, whether it be at my kids' school or through work or church, or where I can get it in right now until my kids are a little older.
Yeah, it sounds like, because I think part of what like NA will drive is like this idea of service, right? Mm-hmm. So it seems like not necessarily that you're replacing meetings completely, but part of that just looks a little bit different at times. You're not necessarily going to meetings, but you're pushing something that this NA meeting program would push, right? I mean, pushing this service, and you're engaging in service, right? It sounds like.
Right. It's hard though too to wear those two hats, to be just an addict in recovery and not have all the answers, or compare my journey or think I should be farther.
Sure.
Because sometimes I just want to be an addict and not labeled as the place where I work.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't. Yeah, it's got to be tiring at times, right? To think like, oh, she has it all together. She has all the answers. She's an authority on this matter. And at times you're like, dude, I'm kind of confused right now. I'm kind of lost
See
at
my
times,
tag?
right?
The tag says, I don't know. I just work here.
Exactly. Yeah, that would get, I think, tiring. But I think that reminds me of something that, because I'm in the psychology program for UAA, UAA psychology program, and one of the persons I think I talked to a psych prof, and they had said, "Oh, I was going to therapy at this time," and he goes, "Yes, I know. Therapists see other therapists because like we need that," and it sounds like because they can't have all the answers all the time to everything, like, and I get that this was about like him or herself, but like they kind of need that same outlet, you know.
Yeah, it's finding the balance, and I have a lot of that support here with any of the people I work with at any time.
So, if you before we wrap up, I guess what is one of the main, like, a couple tips you might give to people who are looking to enter recovery or who are kind of struggling in recovery right now?
I think it's just kind of hearing that you are worth it. You know, that we all have struggles, we all have stuff, but what are you going to do with it? Are you going to let it hinder you and hold you down, or are you going to rise above? You know, use it for good, empower other people, build yourself up. And I consider myself a mighty warrior. You know, anybody can do it. If I can do it, anybody can do it. It doesn't take any kind of special anything to turn your will and your life over and say, look, I can't do this, I need help. And that was a huge obstacle for me because I was raised, you know, you break it, you help fix it, you can't start it, you can't ride it, you get stuck, you're, you know, screwed. So asking for help was huge barrier for me right off the get-go, because I had to act like I had it all together. And so, you know, you didn't tell people your problems. You didn't talk about those kind of things. And that's where the freedom is. That's where the relief is letting it go, dealing with it, talking about it, processing it, you know, digging up those roots and planting new ones. Because I had no idea that there was, you know, I get to teach my son today about meditation. There's no way I would have learned that growing up. Like, you know, we've got to take him on, we've been on 3 family vacations, you know, ask for help, ask questions, put yourself around people that you want to be like, you know, and set goals for your life. And they're achievable, just do small, continue to grow. I just know that it wasn't the life that I wanted to live. And if you're hearing this and you are thinking the same thing, it's because you weren't meant to live that way. You were made for more.
You were meant for more. That's a good note. If you are struggling, or if you are looking for more resources, or even actually if you know somebody that could use a hand, and you know that they're worth more and they can't quite see it at this point, you know, Serenity House here in Soldotna, the intake office is right off of Binkley Street. Thank you so much for sharing your story and all of your recovery progress, and congrats on an almost 7 years. That's awesome.
Thank you so much.
This is Eric and Aaron and Kobe, and this was Jodi's story.